All right, once again, welcome to the AltCar Expo. Before we jump into the next agenda item, which is going to be the Green Fleet discussion, I wanted to acknowledge a couple of visitors we've got. Mr. Xavier Johnson is visiting.
Airport shuttle buses, we used to have 3 CNG stations, we're down to 2. Our airport shuttle buses, we're in the process right now of going potentially to EV, and we're trying to do that through, I guess, an FAA grant, but I think that's direction a lot of the transit agencies and things are going, which is really cool because that's where the technology is going. It's from a GHG reduction. This kind of shows you where we've been in a quick little illustration from a greenhouse gas and how much fuel we consume. We go through about 1.5 million gallons of fuel a year. The orange is diesel, the blue is unleaded. And you can see at 14-15, the yellow line or orange line is our GHG reductions. You can see that sharp drop down, which is when we really started ramping up our hybrids and also renewable diesel. And then GHG reductions, and this is kind of what I alluded to earlier. This is a slide I like to show. I just did a presentation for one of our council subcommittees on transportation and environment, just to make them aware of just where we're at from a technology standpoint. We're at a great point from solution where we have opportunity to actually move our fleet in a direction that's not only going to be better for the environment, but we got solutions that'll be actually good for our workers to take out in the community and do what they need to do, which was what our challenges were in the past. It's nice to move to alternative fuel vehicles, but you got to think about what the service is to the community and are they actually being able to do their work. So that quote there is from the lady now that is the CEO of GM, and it's basically just illustrating in her experience, which has all been with GM. She's saying right now is just an amazing time, and we haven't seen this much change in 50 years from a technology standpoint. Innovation moving forward. So for us, vehicle replacement, we have a large segment of our fleet that's beyond its replacement cycle. So we've gone through a lot of issues with funding and the economy as a lot of other people, so some of our fleet has fallen behind. Viable market solutions, that's kind of what I alluded to earlier. It's a great time because now we're actually starting to see real solutions that can, from a fleet management perspective, we can offer them to our customers to carry out their daily activities. Alt fuel infrastructure has been discussed a lot. Today, as you can see, we've got over 80 chargers, level 2, throughout the city of San Jose, a lot of parking garages and yards, but that continues to be a challenge. GHG reductions, obviously the new vehicle options dramatically reduce those. The one thing that I'm trying to convey to not only our executive council or mayor or whatever leadership is in San Jose, but also the users. There is a lot of other strategies right now that can bridge us to make improvements in this area, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room are aware of those, and that's telematics, idle reduction, engine calibration, and then at the very least is employee awareness. So we've got, let's say, 200 or so hybrids in the fleet. I can run data on that entire fleet, and I can show you a range of miles per gallon anywhere from 45 miles a gallon all the way down to 24. So every employee has the opportunity and the responsibility to try and maximize that efficiency, and that's going to continue to move that needle down. We also, everybody in this room has that same opportunity regardless of how old the vehicle is you drive or what technology it is. How you operate it can greatly reduce these numbers. So anyway, with that, am I out of time? Okay, thank you.
Okay, now I'll call up Mr. Richard Battersby, and Richard will also share the areas of fleet sustainability progress and challenges with the City of Oakland.
And we're also going to test my IT skills. Alt-tab. Oh, not today. See, that's what happens when you take advice from the audience. Okay, I'm going to try it again. I'm a gambling man. F5. Bingo. All right. Hey, Dan, that was great. We did not coordinate or collaborate in advance of these presentations, you're going to see a lot of similar things. And I think that's good. Actually, it's great because it shows, it's reinforcement that I feel we're heading in the right direction with the city of Oakland, to see that our colleagues in other cities are also heading in the same direction. So hopefully there's not too much redundancy here as we run through this. I've just got a brief overview. I want to talk about some of the city of Oakland policies. Keith mentioned the importance of having the support of your elected officials and also your senior leadership, but policy is one of the tools that comes out of that support. At City of Oakland, we got three main fleet-related policies that help us move towards that goal of sustainable operation. The 2003 Green Fleet Policy, it's hard to believe that's 14 years ago. That came out specifically to change the way that the City of Oakland fleet composition looked. At that time, it was mostly gasoline and diesel, and there was a major commitment back in the late 90s, which having been in the area at the time, I was aware of with Clean Cities putting in a CNG station. The city was experimenting with some plug-in vehicles and propane at the time. And just to sort of continue that progress, about 5 years later in 2003, the city codified these goals and objectives in the Green Fleet Policy. So the overarching goal is to reduce emissions, minimize the impact on the environment, and give some support to the folks that are trying to go out there and get other agencies to adopt the vehicles. A few years later, the city came out with the environmentally preferable purchasing policy. How many folks out there have a green purchasing, environmental friendly purchasing policy? Yeah, no, maybe. Okay. If you don't now, you probably will in the future. It's a pretty popular item. I think we're going to have someone from State DGS here that unfortunately had a conflict, but in my experience, they really were leading the way back in the early 2000s, establishing green green purchasing policy. And this just gives some guidance and gives support to us as the purchaser. If we have to go out and acquire an item that's more expensive, we don't necessarily have to go with the low bid because we have this policy that supports the purchase of the cleaner, perhaps more expensive item. So has anybody else run into that before? Hey, I got to go with the low bid. Maybe not so much with natural gas vehicles when you talk about stuff with motor oil, antifreeze, other components that can come from renewable sources. Sometimes that can be an issue, and the environmentally preferable purchasing policy just helps us do that more efficiently. And then in 2012, the city came out with the Energy Climate Action Plan. How many people got Climate Action Plan? Yes, no? How many people from municipalities? I never asked that question. Okay, that's good. So most everybody's been down this road before. If you're a municipality and you haven't yet, and there's some out there, you will be engaging in this. There's a lot of interest. The specific areas that help us are the PA stands for priority area. The regional EV planning and process development, place we were already heading as a city, but this helps us get there more quickly. Accelerate fleet replacement. Again, if you're a fleet manager, this is something that you love to hear. Well, we've actually got it in writing in our climate action plan. TLU's acronym for transportation land use. To go further, foster the use of low carbon vehicles and fuels. That's in the city fleet, but then also the climate action plan goes beyond that and talks about the employee base and talks about the citizen population. And then the last one is reduce transportation impacts of city operation, and that means the environmental impacts as well as traffic. So we've got those three main policies behind us. Our fleet composition, you saw this slide earlier with Daniel Hamilton, which again, I think it's great because we work so closely together. We don't finish each other's sentences, but he knows what I'm doing, I know what they're doing, and it's really important to have an effective overall citywide sustainability goal. This is our composition by vehicle type. Again, you see a lot of us fleet managers talk about the same thing. This just shows the breakdown between autos, light and medium duty, heavy duty, those types of categories. And there was a question about what are we doing in zero emission vehicles in the light and medium duty. I hope that comes up later, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. The non-law enforcement sedan, I use this slide because it's actually an area where I have documented way back in the Green Fleet Policy the existing composition. As a relatively newcomer to the city of Oakland, I've been here 3 years. Sometimes when you want to document progress, it's difficult to go back and find the benchmarks. Well, this one was there and it was pretty easy. And so the main takeaway from this at the bottom is we were 28% of this particular vehicle group, alternative fuel advanced technology, in 2003, and we're currently at 63% and moving that number higher every single year. In fact, last year, our non-law enforcement sedans, we bought only battery electric vehicles, and the year prior to that, we bought only compressed natural gas sedans. So we made a serious commitment, and it's funny, once we decided, hey, we're going CNG, what does Honda, anybody know what Honda did with the CNG Civic? Bye-bye. So we had to be fairly nimble, and we do have a plan for that, and I'll get to that later. That's another important takeaway. We're not just talking about fleet composition and fuels. You have to have some sort of a plan, and as part of that plan, you better have a plan A, B, C, and D, because things can rapidly change, and as a fleet manager, it's never good to have all of your vehicle or fuel eggs in the same basket. This is just a little picture of our annual fuel consumption. We only use 700,000 gallons of fuel. The big change that we made recently was to renewable diesel. That really helped us out a lot. And we switched in 2015. Prior to that, the little dark blue slice, compressed natural gas, was our only alternative fuel use of any significance in the city. But when we made the switch to renewable diesel, it had a big impact. And I got this next slide more as a visual than anything else. The red indicating petroleum fuel, so you can see the vast majority city of Oakland fuel use was petroleum based, but when we made the switch to renewable diesel, we got almost to 50% overnight, and we're talking about low emissions, alternative fuels, and in the case of renewable diesel, it's a renewable source also. What's next? Well, obviously we're going to continue with battery electric and hybrid sedans. Those are solutions that are proven, they work well. I don't think anyone is surprised to hear that. On the heavy duty side, we're making investments in some street sweepers and refuse trucks. We're looking at natural gas currently. We have on-site natural gas compression, and we also have good natural gas support in the area. We've got a choice. Do we go renewable diesel? Do we go natural gas? Unfortunately, fortunately, the price of petroleum fuel right now is pretty low. Unfortunately, anybody who's been in this business for a while knows that's going to change. Is it next year? I don't know, year after that. But without a doubt, we're going to see petroleum fuels back up over the $3 a gallon range, probably approaching $4 a gallon. Natural gas historically has held the $2.50 range retail, $2.50 gasoline gallon equivalent. Our cost coming off the pipe is closer to $1 a gallon. So there's significant financial incentives. If I was just looking short term, I wouldn't even consider natural gas at the moment, but looking at a long-term strategic approach, understanding these assets will be in the fleet for 10 or 15 years, not only is this a good environmental decision, but it's also a good financial decision. After I retire, whoever the fleet manager is in 10 years will hopefully be talking about this. And of course, renewable diesel. That's, again, this isn't a renewable diesel panel, but the way I sum it up, this is the way you instantly convert all of your diesel vehicles in your fleet, and that's not just on-road, that can be off-road construction. You can do it with your diesel power generators. You can do it with your smaller equipment like packers or vibratory tampers. You can convert them to a renewable alternative fuel overnight, and here in the state of California, it's really not a significant cost difference. And I would say that cost difference is negligible. So if you have a fleet using diesel vehicles and you haven't considered renewable diesel, need to get on the stick. Call Clean Cities, call Suzanne, call Keith, call me. We'll hook you up. What are the areas we're looking to expand? The EV charging infrastructure. Even before the city nailed down that employee incentive program with the Nissan Leaf, we were building EV charging infrastructure as fast as we can in city facilities, and partnering with our colleagues in environmental services. We in equipment services fleet are actually dabbling in assisting other city agencies install charging infrastructure at their locations for non-fleet vehicles, as well as the city parking structures. And I see Kevin's here formerly from the UC Davis Institute of Transportation Studies. They did a very interesting study there that showed hey, if you build the EV charging infrastructure, that has a therapeutic effect for increasing plug-in vehicle adoption. And a lot of it was theoretical and conclusion-based, but a lot of it was data-based. And I'm here to tell you, this is a fact. If you build charging infrastructure, it might not happen overnight, it might not happen the next month, but you will go from vacant, unused parking spaces to people stacked up, waiting, coordinating, hey, when are you going to be done charging? I'll be back at lunch, let's switch the plugging cord. So put that charge, if you're interested in expanding the electric vehicle presence or plug-in vehicle presence, put in the charging infrastructure. And you know what? If you think you need 10, put in 20, put in 30, because you will not be able to build the infrastructure fast enough. The other area we need to expand is data capture. And this is related to utilization of the vehicle by fuel type. This just helps us plot which vehicle we select. We have multiple options in most categories, light and medium duty being the exception. And it's important to match the duty cycle of the customer to the equipment's capability. We also need to do a better job with EV charging. The ideal solution or the ideal deployment of an EV charger is where you can use it during the day for employees or visitors to the city infrastructure customers, and at night you can plug in your city vehicles there. So that way you get maximum utilization, and also your city vehicles are charging at night when electricity is cheapest. But don't tell anybody I said that. And also emissions. Emissions is kind of a tough animal for us to pin down in fleet. Fortunately, we've got our colleagues in environmental services that do a really good job on that. But it's difficult for us to track EV use as a fuel. And then also if we can't track it as a fuel, it's more difficult for us to calculate the emissions reduction. And of course, we continue the education and outreach. I look at it as every fleet vehicle that I put in a motor pool that's powered by something other than gasoline and diesel is an education opportunity for the person that gets behind the wheel. Most of the time it's city employees. Sometimes we have city employees taking out vendors or contractors in the city vehicles, but the bottom line is they're being exposed to that technology. Areas that we're moving into the future, we're looking at solar EV charging. Resiliency is a big issue for cities these days. Having options makes you a more resilient city and more resilient fleet. Solar is one way to eliminate the possibility of loss of electrical supply. What do you do? Well, if you have solar, that at least gives you some electric to charge your vehicles. I mentioned earlier we're moving into the hydrogen area. Now that the stations are becoming more prolific, that's definitely an area of opportunity. And we're also looking at hybrid and auxiliary hybrid for service vehicles in the light and medium duty application. And finally, we're looking at renewable diesel sedans. I think Daniel Hamilton mentioned that. People say, why in the world would you want to go to a diesel sedan? Diesel's dirty, whatever. Renewable diesel doesn't have the same negative connotations of the standard petroleum diesel. And you can acquire a diesel sedan for about the same cost as a hybrid sedan. We're talking about the mid $25,000 range. So if we've got this investment in renewable diesel and we have the vehicle capable of running, and we can achieve a 70% carbon reduction over unleaded or diesel, I think it just makes sense. It gives us yet another option. And this is a really cool slide. If you follow the low carbon fuel standard, this just ranks out the various fuels in carbon intensity, starting with gasoline and diesel on the left and moving to the right. And so you can see the red circle, that's our renewable diesel carbon intensity. It's about a 70% reduction from standard diesel or unleaded gasoline because of the renewable source. So with that brings me to the question portion.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Actually, we're going to bring up Mr. Bill Zeller from the city of San Francisco.
He said I was done.
Yeah.
Save your questions for Bill.
Okay. No, we've got some questions. And you want to do this, Bill? F5? Is that what we're doing?
I ain't touching it till you fix it.
Did I hear F5?
F5.
Okay. Well, we want to bring up Bill's here, right?
Well, just escape and then mouse over the PowerPoint at the bottom. There you
Is that
That's it right there. Find Bill's. One more time.
I'll let Richard do it. Oh, there it is.
to say I'm kind of a neophyte when it comes to fleet stuff. I spent most of my career in environmental issues, and I'm kind of the nuts and berries guy who just kind of got his baptism under fire going over to fleet. When I have to actually do it, it's a big difference. One of the things that, well, let me just kind of give you an overview of our fleet. We're talking mostly scale here. Oops, I guess I need to get closer. I should have asked, how do I do this? There we go. I'm not going to say this stuff because I'm just going to do it right now and kind of get moving on it. Most of the differences here are in scale. San Francisco, we have about 8,700 pieces of equipment, vehicles, pretty much everything from motor scooters to cement mixers, and that's pretty much everything. About 2,200 of those vehicles operate on diesel. Now, this is 2016. We're basically in this, and our numbers are really big because we include Muni Transit. One of the things when you talk to fleet guys, you got to make sure you know what they're including in their fleet. You guys are talk about having your well, we basically don't have any of our garbage. Some fleets count their garbage refuse. We don't count garbage refuse because it's not part of our fleet. Other fleets have transit in there and some don't. But most of this is transit. About 80% of the diesel we use is transit, which has really been helpful because the transit guys really get really in the weeds as far as the details on the fuel. They have many more resources in that regard than we do. So we basically did about, this is as of 2016, about 6.5 million gallons of renewable diesel. That's pretty much everything we buy now. That resulted in about a 50,000 metric ton reduction in greenhouse gas emissions for the year. We used to use a lot of B5 and B20 biodiesel. We still use a small amount of low sulfur diesel. And that's used principally in the emergency generators. We kind of let that, it was a small portion of our diesel usage. We didn't do the testing we felt necessary. Those are very, very critical pieces of equipment. We didn't want to put new fuel in them that we weren't absolutely sure about. And really wasn't a whole lot of fuel gets burned in those anyway, so we just kind of let that part ride for right now. We also burn about 2 million gallons of gasoline a year, which is principally in our police fleet. There were some discussions about hybrids. We haven't, I believe we're on our 4th year of not buying any non-police pursuit vehicles, police pursuit sedans that are anything that's but a hybrid. There's no conventional vehicles coming into our fleet, our sedan fleet. We ended up with a weighted average carbon intensity, and I'm sorry, one of my favorite units in the whole world just fell off there. That's the grams per megajoule of energy. It's a kind of a weird term, but when you compare that to diesel, diesel's around 99.8. So there's pretty much a 60% reduction on average. That's a weighted average of the carbon intensity. And if you're not aware of it, carbon intensity is it's part of the low carbon fuel standard that CARB administers. They measure the carbon intensity of all the fuels. They're called pathways. These basically measure all of the inputs that go into producing the fuel up to the time it enters the tank of the vehicle. So you could get the same numbers for normal conventional fuels, electricity, depending on the site, hydrogen, renewable diesel, depending on where it came from, and all the other fuels. Just to kind of digress just a little bit, when I made the switch from environmental to fleet, one of the first things I learned was basically if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, and you can't write reports. And we are really deeply involved in telematics. And I know my other 2 colleagues have mentioned that. We're upwards of 4,000 vehicles. We're about 4 years into this program. And we have really found some amazing information, and we're still just scratching the surface. If you are running a fleet, you really need this. I can assure you, you may think you know what's going on with your fleet, but you're going to have some serious surprises when you start actually measuring it. One of the interesting things we're doing right now, and I think it's come up, that the police pursuit vehicles are typically kind of off limits because of the public safety aspect. We took a deep dive with our public safety organizations, and we found out what their problem was with telematics, which is essentially the GPS function, being able to tell where the vehicle is in real time. Personally, I don't care. In fleet, we really don't. I don't care where the vehicle is. I just want to know, how it's running and how it's been utilized. So basically, we got one of our vendors to build us some prototype units for telematics that don't have a GPS function in them, and we're testing them right now. That'll give us a window on what's going on with that 2 million gallons of gasoline that's being used by the fleet right now in the public safety sector. And we're pretty excited about that and hoping we're going to be able to do some interesting things with that pretty soon. Also, some of you may be involved in Vision Zero programs, the safety programs. Telematics is a great window on that too. It helps you understand how the vehicles are being utilized, speeding, aggressive driving, which bears on safety, and basically it has a big impact on your fuel usage. Just talking a little bit, if we're kind of deeply involved in renewable diesel, and I get asked these questions. I know there's a lot of confusion. Renewable diesel is a fuel derived from biomass that meets all the standards of ASTM D975. We threw this in there. It's not a monoalkoid ester, that's what biodiesel is. And you really want to be clear when you're talking to your fleet people, when you're talking to your engine manufacturers and suppliers, you are not burning biodiesel. It's not another biodiesel. It's not just like biodiesel. We got that a lot when we were working on this 2.5 years ago, when there was really a lot of learning to be done there. Renewable diesel meets ASTM D975, which is a key standard in the industry. This is basically what defines diesel. It's chemically nearly identical to the conventional diesel, with the exception of aromatics, which is a part of diesel that's just simply not present here. Normally, the normal California diesel has to be below a certain level of aromatics. We don't have any. And it's produced in a hydro treating process, which is quite similar to what's used in petroleum refineries. So there seems to be an opportunity there, as the market grows, to basically repurpose actual capital that's been designed for petroleum to make renewable diesel, is kind of a neat add-on going forward. I won't go into biodiesel, but they have their own ASTM standard for biodiesel. We're just pretty much out of that business. The advantages, I'll say that we've kind of gotten to a point where people have forgotten that they're actually using renewable diesel. We've reduced the after-treatment maintenance. We didn't even know. My fleet group didn't even know that the transit guys were having so much trouble with the biodiesel. Biodiesel has issues with our diesel particulate filters, in that the engines don't completely get up to temperature and run for a sufficient amount of time, and they clog a lot, and they basically spend an awful lot of money working on solving those problems. It eliminates tank storage problems. We just probably tripled the amount of money we were spending on underground tank maintenance when we started using biodiesel, and that's all gone away. So we've reduced our costs significantly. I frankly talked to the director of the bus system, and I said, how's this affected mileage, and how's this affected, the people, other than your cost for maintenance? They don't even notice. They're just it's kind of at a point where it's just kind of a moot point. One of the nice things too is if the fuel costs get out of whack, or there's some other reason, or we can't get it, we can always just quickly change back to whatever we were doing before. So there's no stranded investment like you have in CNG. I'm not a critic of CNG by any stretch of the imagination, but with CNG or gaseous fuels, you got to buy the compressor and you got to buy the vehicles, and you're kind of locked in. We don't feel like we're locked into anything, which gives us a lot more flexibility with pricing. Some of the disadvantages, yes, we definitely went around the barn a few times with the engine manufacturers, with the warranty issues. Generally, all manufacturers that we're aware of specify ASTM D975 as their specification for fuel. Renewable diesel, by definition, meets that specification. Most have okayed the use of renewable diesel. We just got notified last week that Cummins, which was the last major holdout that we have to deal with, just okayed the use of renewable diesel in their fleet or their vehicles. We have heard from local suppliers of the vehicles or the engines that it's their opinion that it violates the warranty. We've yet to find anybody who's actually experienced a failure that could be traced back to fuel and had the engine manufacturer actually enforce that warranty issue. If it meets ASTM D975, all the published material says you're covered by the warranty. Our main concern is that the fuel we purchase, and we knew this going in, is pretty much offshore. It comes from Indonesia. At the time we signed our contracts, that was all that was available. We made the conscious decision. We felt we had to grow the market. We jumped in to kind of push the market ahead, knowing that the fuel we were getting was coming from offshore, and in the hopes that that would stimulate domestic production. It seems to have done that. There are several entities that have approached us, with interest in the next round of bidding. We have another year on this contract, year and a half, on this contract. So we're expecting to have local, not local, but domestic production available. Thank you. Our contracting specifications, basically, I'm sorry if I'm getting in the weeds here, but I've been told this is kind of like important to a lot of people here. We define, basically, the fuel has to meet two requirements, ASTM D975, which I explained earlier. Then there's another one, ASTM D6866. This verifies the percentage of biofuel that's, the percentage of biofuel in petroleum. Interesting question is, if it's chemically identical to petroleum, how do you tell the difference? Essentially, you use carbon-14 dating. That's what they do. So you can tell the stuff that made up the biofuel died last year, the stuff that made up the petroleum died several million years ago. And that's how they do it. It's pretty simple, but when we asked the question the first time, there was a lot of head scratching because nobody had ever asked the question before. Our requirements are that the carbon intensity must be 60% below petroleum. We left that definition a little open. We basically said, thank you. We said you have to provide us with proof that the fuel meets that standard, but we didn't define what that was. That turned out to be a bit problematic, but we have resolved it, and now we're satisfied with the documentation. We were never in question that we were actually getting renewable diesel from our vendor, but we wanted to make sure we had the documentation to back it up in case we got audited on that. I'm going to dispense with Title 13. That's just the general fuel regulation. 3 things I'd like to do is to refine the carbon intensity pathway audit trail. I think there's also the big thing is develop a clear understanding of the near and long-term values of the low carbon fuel standards and the RINs. We don't really know exactly how much renewable diesel costs to make. We know how much we're paying for it. We know how much of the RINs are worth. How much of that are we leaving on the table? Our long-term next step is hopefully renewable gasoline. We have every time we talk to our supplier Neste or the producer Neste, that's the question they always get from me, and they can pretty much count on that. They're working on it. It's gasoline. Renewable gasoline is a bit tougher nut to crack than renewable diesel, but it's coming. And since I had just a little more time, I haven't mentioned renewable natural gas. We don't use it in our fleet, but the airport has stations that dispense fuel, and they use it in their buses and in vendor vehicles that are required to use natural gas. So it's not included there, but last I heard it was something on the order of about 1.5 million to 2 million gallons, or GGE, a year of renewable natural gas. So I get some head nodding here. And that's all I had. And I didn't even leave my contact information, so you can't talk to me later.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. I have a few follow-up questions, and then I want to open it up to the audience to ask any questions they may have of this panel. Dan, how has the City of San Jose Mayor and Council supported the progress made implementing sustainable policies, and creating user buy-in. How has this support assisted you in working with your departments on transportation-related infrastructure?
So, similar to what Richard talked about and our counterpart Phil there, we do have a policy that's from council, as well as city policies that tell us basically a green fleet policy, environmentally preferred product policy that helps us in those conversations with departments when we make a purchase. Actually, the fleet being centrally managed, we do the specification writing and we do all the acquisitions, working with purchasing, but we work with the departments as a partner, and we always look for that alt fuel solution first and always refer to those policies to guide us. So
Okay, great,
helps
thank
a
you.
lot. Yeah.
And Bill, just curious, what is driving the need to report San Francisco's carbon footprint?
Well, basically, I'll just be loud. We do have some codes or city ordinances that address carbon footprint. Those are principally focused on light-duty vehicles. We just saw some opportunities, particularly with renewable diesel, where we could make the jump without a whole lot of expense. In fact, we're actually saving a little money on fuel because we went from biodiesel to renewable diesel. But we just had an ordinance just passed that's pushing the electric vehicle side of things forward. Really don't have any sense on how that's going to hit us and what that's going to cost, but we're looking into that now. So it's just happened. Maybe I'll have some more for you next year on that. But it's basically it's a city mandate.
Okay, and maybe I'll throw this out to the entire panel. So why does our panel feel it's important for transportation fleets to develop a clear understanding of the near and long-term value of LCFS credits and RINs? And what recommendations do you have to promote education and awareness to broaden knowledge about this topic?
Everybody's looking this way. Are they looking at you, Bill, or looking at me?
You go ahead.
Well, I'll tell you, my thoughts on the matter is that's the future. And if our goals and objectives are going to require or encourage us to use these low carbon fuels, it behooves us as responsible stewards of taxpayer resources, if there are credits available, to take advantage of that program as well. And I think that adds to the total cost of ownership. If you're conducting some sort of an evaluation on how much does it cost me to deploy vehicles by fuel type over the life of that vehicle, and the renewable fuel source allows you to generate low carbon fuel standard credits, you should be doing that.
I'll say that I guess when we tried to start buying renewable diesel, you look at it as a fuel that has the credits attached, or that the credits have been stripped away and the producer of the fuel keeps them. We couldn't buy any fuel that didn't have the credits stripped away. So these guys the fuel providers are collecting these credits really aggressively. Okay, so now you got my attention. If you want it so bad, it must be valuable. Well, what is it worth? Well, I don't know. It's hard to tell from our perspective, because I can tell you what we pay for the fuel. I don't know exactly what it costs to produce the fuel, and I don't know exactly what the carbon credits are worth today. I've been to a couple of conferences, and boy, those things get expensive fast, but I'm just not going to any more of those. But I think this is a time when fleet management and cities in general need to kind of band together and get themselves educated as to how the low carbon fuel standards and the RINs, the renewable identification numbers, money attached to both of those, how those work, because with the amount of fuel we use, we're talking tens of millions of dollars, and we just don't even know how that works yet. So that's my nickel tour, and
I would totally agree with that, Bill. As a public fleet manager, it's very challenging, and we're all seeking to understand how these tax credits benefit our public agencies in the long run, to make the justification to migrate to renewable fuels, whether it be renewable diesel or renewable natural gas. And I think, the benefit of these types of workshops and professional associations that we all belong to that are fleet managers is sharing that information. We're all trying different approaches and bid strategies. I recently learned of a new bid strategy you know, just because we're learning as we're moving along, and it's trial and error is what's the best way to bid these commodities, you know, against what opus index. And, you know, we're getting different results with different opus indexes that are required in these bid specs. And so I think the more and more that we can share that information with each other, eventually we're going to come up with the ideal solution that'll benefit us all in the long run. And with that, I'd like to open it up to the group here. If they have any questions for our panelists, we take them now. We've got about 10 minutes before lunch. Okay. Mr. Nez.
Yeah, I'd like to steal a question from the last session that was deferred to this panel, because it was a good question I want to get in. But I spent the better part of the last 27 years identifying the market for light-duty alternative fuel vehicles and supporting those markets with detailed cost and emissions analyses, demonstration projects, infrastructure, demand needs, whatever it took. But now, as the original questioner pointed out, that's the low-lying fruit. And most of my clients now are the manufacturer or end users or prospective end users of large, heavy-duty, mostly electric vehicles. And I'm talking about electric refuse trucks and school buses. Transit is pretty well developed, but yard tractors, drayage trucks, medium-duty electric vehicles like utility company bucket trucks, and even did a demonstration project, which I think a few of you participated in, with a large plug-in hybrid electric vehicle pickup truck. So my question is, I wanted to get your perspective on what do you think is the next step, and how do we what would you like to see to help develop these markets for larger vehicles, specifically larger electric vehicles?
I actually have a quick thought on that, and it's an old saying, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. There's a lot of things we can do, let's say a hybrid pickup, for example, as opposed to an electric pickup. I have nothing against electric pickups, but I could buy hybrid pickups a lot easier than I could buy an electric one. If I can buy 500 hybrid pickups that cut my fuel usage by 50%, and I can only afford 50 battery electric ones, I'm farther ahead and for less money. I think cities, one of my marching orders is, yeah, I want you to reduce greenhouse gases, but you need to do it in the most cost-effective way possible. I would suggest that we look at, you know, what can you really do, what numbers can you do, and really, you know, plug-in heavy-duty equipment is nice, but hybrids would be pretty great. I'd like to have a pickup truck that, you know, when I gave it to the guy, he didn't even know it was a hybrid. And we can do that now with some of the models that are out there. Getting people to actually drive these things is difficult. It's really hard. And so the easier it can integrate into your fleet, the better.
I only see two small problems in that area, Kevin. It's cost and availability. And I know you and I have had these conversations over the years. We're heading in the right direction. This market is in its infancy, but in my opinion, we're real close to ground zero. Folks don't think that of Dixon, California as being the mecca of technology, but right now a lot of really big things and very interesting things are happening from a couple of very progressive companies. One's a design manufacturing company, the other's a vehicle upfitter that does auxiliary hybrid units. If you follow PG&E, you know all about this, but I'm guessing within the next year or two we're going to see a big proliferation of that medium-duty service truck, also with the auxiliary hybrid unit on back, both in hybrid and plug-in electric. But right now the main challenges are cost and availability from my perspective, because I'll run them tomorrow if I can afford them and they're available.
Great. This gentleman here next.
Oh yeah, I had a quick question. Well, I don't know if it's a quick question, but I had a question on renewable diesel, and just curious about it as a long-term solution with regard to costs, because it seems like there would be a supply and demand issue. As the demand goes up, the cost might go up as well. And then an add-on question is, it doesn't really do anything about criteria emissions, and so it has a carbon offset or carbon advantage, but I'm just wondering about what the fleets are considering for opportunities to reduce the criteria emissions as well.
On the supply side, two things. One, I said 6.5 million gallons, sounds like a big number. There was about 700 million gallons of renewable diesel was delivered to the west coast of the United States last year, or year before last. And a little more than that went to the East Coast. There's a lot of it out there. What happened to most of that was it was mixed in small quantities with regular diesel. And it's kind of like, like we do with gasoline. And most of it got absorbed that way into the marketplace, so the oil companies could meet their low carbon fuel standard goals. We don't see moving towards that as being a particularly big driver. Yeah, it probably will bring the market, basically could in the short term drive pricing up a little bit. But as I said before, we actually had a problem finding it, and we had to bring it in from overseas, the renewable diesel. Our hope is that as the price goes up, people domestically will start making it. The feedstock's here. You can make a renewable diesel pretty much out of anything you can make biodiesel out of. What was your other question? I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, that does. The other one was just about criteria emissions.
It is better because it doesn't have as many, it doesn't have the aromatics in it. I believe that's the requirement. We're for the city of San Francisco, our policy is if it doesn't hurt criteria emissions, we're fine. And we understand it's a little better. Our goal right now is what we're working on is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. When I can cut greenhouse gas emissions by 60% and actually save a little money, that's a hell of a deal. That's a real hard thing to do.
And renewable diesels gives you about a 30% reduction in particulate matter, and then there's also a reduction in NOx, which has always been the lick on biodiesel, especially in the South Coast, in Sacramento, and well, I guess San Joaquin Valley as well. And as far as long-term cost, if the price of renewable diesel goes up, like Bill alluded to, you're well insulated. If you don't like the pricing structure, switch back to standard diesel. You're not limited. You can switch back and forth. You can mix in any blend that you want to.
I think another important point is that in California we've had laws passed related to waste diversion of organic waste, and these folks, many of you in the room I'm sure are more familiar with that subject than I am, but it seems to me that my friends in waste management are all looking for new ways to deal with that, to comply with those laws, and making renewable diesel is obviously a strategy. And so if that drives more domestic production, and the cost effectiveness benefits not only your fleets but also your waste diversion goals, it's a win-win for all.
Yeah, I get a question for San Jose. You're looking at EVs for the airport, which seems to me an ideal application for those low speed, not a lot of miles. Are you also looking at the wave inductive charging? They've got a 50 kilowatt, they're looking at a 250.
They're looking at a couple different options, and I don't think that's been decided yet. I think they're looking at, and I'm not that familiar with all the different charging structures, but as opposed to the depot type charging or en route, they're looking at more of the port where they're at bay when the vehicles are not in use.
But conductive or inductive?
Oh, conductive, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's also an application that seems to me where inductive charging would work pretty well, but
Right.
if you got fairly good boarding and alighting times, because they're all carrying luggage and all that. So.
Right. Yeah, I think with a lot of the questions here related to the different vehicle classes, I think for a city like us, we're dealing with a couple different competing priorities. One is, trying to take care of the environment, the political things which are important, as well as getting work done that gets done in the community. So as that technology and those solutions are realistic and affordable, and then again with the assistance from different programs like government grants and things, we're open to all those solutions as long as when we put the person in the vehicle to do the work, it can get done, right?
This one back there, I think he was next.
How much of the adoption of advanced technology vehicles or vehicles that don't drive the same as traditional ones is the result of the operator needing additional training or pushback from the operators as opposed to simply a cost or a infrastructure component?
So
Bill?
If I may-
I'm sorry.
So if I could make a quick example that I had just the other day. So it's interesting how this industry is evolving. I mean, we started with, I guess hybrids, maybe we started with CNG or whatever, but, you know, there was a lot of resistance in the beginning, but now that you see a lot of these solutions in the retail market, you know, we're dealing with law enforcement, we're dealing with inspectors. I had just a conversation the other day where I have an inspector who's probably in his 60s. He's about 6'3", 6'4", and we just happened to be in a meeting together, and he's been in a C-Max. And this is a person that is very outspoken. He'll tell you whatever's, you know, on his mind. I said, I made the, you know, risk of asking him, how's your vehicle? And he goes, yeah, he goes, I love it. He acts, and this is the guy that you would expect not to be an advocate for vehicles like this. And he also went a little bit further to say, my wife and I were thinking about getting one. So, I mean, this is change that I'm seeing occur over my career that's real. I mean, for myself personally, I came home with maybe a little too personal, a Jeep Wrangler. And my 12-year-old almost had a heart attack. So I took it back. I came back with the C-Max, and she loves it. And I'm leasing it, and the other day she said, Dad, are you going to return that vehicle? You're going to buy it, right? And I put solar on the house. I mean, I went from muscle cars in my teens to now I'm driving a C-Max that plugs in and gets me back and forth to work. And actually, they're a lot of fun to drive. So I think it's getting them in the vehicle, getting the experience, and ultimately, can it do the job? So if you can get all through those barriers, it's becoming very successful.
Okay, we've got time for just a couple more questions.
This is actually an announcement. The city of San Leandro, where I work as sustainability manager, is hiring a fleet manager. The range of salary is $86,000 to $103,000. So let me know. I would love to have an ally in our fleet area.
And I think
cover the full
we're all looking
spectrum.
for mechanics up here as well.
Well, if I could just say one more thing about electric vehicles, our mechanics are starting to like them as well because they are less to maintain and they're in the shop a lot less, and that is a proven fact for us over time.
And just, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, two questions. So going back to the vehicles, medium versus heavy duty, and then the mission specific vehicles. So what are you guys doing to move that needle? I mean, I talked to BYD and various manufacturers, and they keep on telling me if there's a demand, we'll build it. The technology is there. So you're saying that you'll buy it tomorrow if it's available. So I'm wondering, is there a dialogue between you and the manufacturers to stimulate that supply versus demand curve so that you can get what you want? And then my second question has to do with low carbon fuel credits that Bill was talking about regarding whether you guys are applying for low carbon fuel credits through your EV usage as well as perhaps your renewable diesel. I spoke to the folks at the state there, and they're certainly motivated, and they want you guys to start applying for those credits and then sell it back to the community. Or
Just on the question about demand on the heavy duty, I'm going to borrow from the previous panel and suggest we defer that question to Mr. Bill Van Amberg's panel coming up. I think he's definitely the person that can talk about that. It may be, Bill, do you want to respond to the LCFS question?
We've been working with the CARB staff on this to understand the issue better. Yes, ours is actually, San Francisco is considerably more complicated than what other cities have to deal with, because we're not only talking about electric vehicles and renewable diesel, but our whole muni transit system, about 2/3 of it is electric. And we, by the way, generate all the electricity for that comes from Hetch Hetchy Hydro. So we actually probably have a bigger, energy-wise footprint on the electric side than we have on the liquid fuel side. Again, it's a huge challenge to understand how this works. I don't have the bandwidth. We're kind of like, where the rubber meets the road guys. We definitely recognize that we need some help. We really think there's an important opportunity here for the cities and counties to band together, because there are resources at CARB who are, as you said, would really like to see more cities jump into this. They think there's a lot of of benefit being left on the table there or not being taken advantage of that they would really like to see. So yeah, I would totally agree. Can I just say one thing though? You brought up an interesting question when I was sitting in the back. How can we address manufacturers? Now on the light duty side, I can assure you that every time Ford and GM come through the door and say, how can we sell you guys more vehicles? We're desperately interested in more light duty vehicles that are EVs, that don't have leather, please. That's a huge problem. I mean, they want to put leather on everything. I can't buy it. I mean, there's a city ordinance that says you can't buy any leather. The other thing is, and it's not part of this discussion, it's autonomous vehicles and the precursors to that, the safety requirements, the really cool stuff you can buy on a high-end car now that keeps you from running into the guy in front of you. I got 4,000 vehicles driving around in San Francisco every day. I would dearly love to have a device on those cars to keep people from running into each other.
And
But-
I have to comment on the OEM part. I hate to steal your thunder, but we're up against lunch. There have been
Shut up,
efforts.
Sword.
There have been organized efforts. If me from the city of Oakland was to call BYD and leave a message and I waited by my phone, I would die of starvation before they called me back. But there was a big effort, and this is about 5 or 6 years ago. I don't know if folks really are knowledgeable. It was headed up by Dave Mizell, and he got together, PG&E fleet director, I think he's retired now, got together with some really big players that have purchasing volume. I'm talking about Pepsi, I'm talking about FedEx, I'm talking about UPS, Coca-Cola. Got these big players together and had a discussion. What do we need in a plug-in vehicle? And they developed a platform that was actually fairly flexible, that had modular battery packs. This was in probably the class 5 to 6 range, their standard delivery vehicle. Went to the manufacturers with that. Okay, where are we at now? So if someone that has that much horsepower and can get that much industry consensus can approach the manufacturers and tell them what we want, and 6 years later we've got nothing, that should tell you how effective that strategy is. We've also conducted meetings with Air Resources Board to see if maybe we could move the needle by funding, by getting funding in the area. And we are asked constantly as municipalities, well, and this goes back several years, how come more of you aren't participating in the HVIP? How come more of you aren't participating in the CVRP? And the main answer, the consistent answer that was given back is, well, the funding level is not adequate. If you're a commercial private industry fleet or you're a citizen, you have federal incentives available that can tip the scale in favor of the more clean vehicle. But when you're a public fleet, those incentives weren't available. So I give Air Resources Board a lot of credit for acknowledging that and taking a look at the HVIP, but specifically the CVRP, and coming out with the pilot, the fleet pilot project. So I think we're going to see change from that perspective, but in my experience approaching the manufacturers, unless every fleet in the nation is telling them the same thing, and believe me, the message they're getting from the fleet managers in Montana and Wyoming, and I'm not going to say Colorado because they're pretty progressive, but in the middle of the United States, they're not asking for the same things that we're asking for on the West Coast, and what I believe to be them to be asking for on the East Coast.
So if I could just say one thing real quick about Bill's comment. So Dodge or Chrysler came out with the Pacifica. It's a hybrid van, which is the very first kind of platform that we've seen. So that same scenario, I saw the literature on it. It was all leather, all that kind of stuff. So I immediately emailed our factory contact and said, are you guys making this in a fleet version? And they said the response was, he responded right away, eventually. So then a few weeks ago, I emailed him again. I said, can we get this in the fleet version? And he emailed right back, yes, you got until May 5th to order one, and then it's the new model year kicks in, right? So guess what? I ordered one. So it's a little bit more money, but it's cloth interior. But my strategy is to get one in the fleet and start using it, because it's a completely different hybrid platform than we've seen before. Those vans are tremendously versatile. All the seats fold flat. It can carry passengers. It can carry cargo. But it's just all that incremental change, vehicle by vehicle, is what changes perception. So.
Yeah. And just one other comment, if you're not aware, Many of us were at the NAFA I&E in Tampa a couple weeks ago, and we saw Ford unveil a pursuit-rated hybrid sedan. So if you can imagine the number of idle hours that are going to be reduced as we implement those in our public fleets, it's going to be huge. One more question, and then I have a softball question for Richard that he needs to prepare for, and then we're going to go to lunch. Okay. No, there was another person back here. No? All right, Kevin.
A question about driver acceptance and behavior. I put a number of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles in dozens of fleets and households too. I've seen the full range of drivers who will make sure that that vehicle runs strictly on electricity. They'll plug in at every opportunity. They'll never be unplugged. And then the other, even one driver who the charger was 1 mile from his office and had to get a ride back and forth. And I've seen the other extreme where they just didn't plug in because they didn't have to. And a lot of that comes from the top down. And I'm talking to the cream de la cream here. You're all advocates, but that's not the case in all fleets. So, what would you advise a fleet who, wants to adopt electric vehicles, but
Chris has the answer. Inductive charging. Take it out of the hands of the driver.
I have a suggestion too. We have that problem. We have hybrids, plug-in hybrids and hybrids of the same vehicle that get exactly the same mileage. And we're discussing, okay, you got a plug-in hybrid and you don't plug it in. We're taking it back, and we're debating what we're going to give them. And it's probably not going to be a very nice car. And we figure we do that a couple times and
I like that.
take care of the problem. Well, I don't want to spend money to change behavior. And the other thing is telematics and another system. We're also installing the electronic guts out of Zipcar. So you can basically walk up to one of our vehicles, tap a card on the windshield, and away you go. That system actually will tell you that what driver was in the car and if they plugged it in or not. And if you got somebody who doesn't plug it in over and over again, well, then we've got a problem, and that's going to be something for management to take care of. How they're going to do it, I don't know, but I'll be able to tell you what to do, what's going on. We haven't had that before.
Okay, Richard, last question before we all head to lunch. What are some sources of information and guidance for those that seek to learn more about developing and implementing fleet sustainability policies, goals, and initiatives?
Well, Keith, I've been giving a lot of thought to that today, and the only answer I can come up with is clean cities. I know everybody's shocked.
Thank you very much. Appreciate our panel. Let's give them a hand.